You are standing on a hilltop 15,000 years ago. No fence, no wall, no sign that reads you are now entering anything. You could walk in any direction, for as long as your legs carried you, and never cross a border. For the first 290,000 years of human existence, that was the default. No countries, no nations, no borders, just land and people on it. Then somebody invented an idea so powerful that 8 billion people now organize their entire lives around it. How did humans invent countries? The answer does not start where you think. For most of human history, the answer to where are you from was not a place. It was a family. For 96% of human existence, humans lived in small mobile bands of 20 to 50 people. No permanent address. No fixed territory. You moved when the food moved. You belonged to a group of people, not a patch of ground. Robin Dunbar proposed that the human brain has a cognitive limit on stable social relationships. That number is roughly 150, now known as Dunbar's number. Below 150, you can know everyone personally. You govern by gossip, by reputation. Above 150, the system breaks. You cannot track 300 social relationships personally. And when the system breaks, you need something new to hold people together. Something bigger than a family tree. The country is the workaround. But the workaround took thousands of years to develop. And it started with one decision. The decision to stop moving. Around 12,500 BCE, in the Levant, a culture called the Natufians did something unusual. They stayed put. They were still hunter-gatherers. They settled down before inventing farming. Settling down changes your relationship with the ground beneath you. When you are nomadic, land is a resource you pass through. When you are settled, you clear it, store food on it, bury your dead in it. And once you bury your ancestors somewhere, that ground is no longer just dirt. It is identity. The first border markers were not fences. They were graves. But burials were not enough to bind large numbers of strangers together. For that, you needed belief. In southeastern Turkey, 9,500 BCE, hunter-gatherers built something monumental. Göbekli Tepe, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the pyramids. The builders were not farmers. They were scattered hunter-gatherers who came together from across the region. Archaeologist Klaus Schmidt concluded, first came the temple, then the city. Shared belief was the first technology that allowed humans to cooperate beyond 150 people. You cannot personally know more than 150 people. But you can believe in the same God as 10,000 strangers. At Göbekli Tepe, the story was carved in stone. Today, it is printed on a passport. But shared belief does not make a state. For that, you need grain. Around 10,000 BCE, humans in the Fertile Crescent began domesticating wheat and barley. James C. Scott argues that the first states formed specifically around grain. Not rice. Not yams. Grain. The reason is simple. Grain is visible. It ripens at a predictable time. It can be measured. A yam growing underground is invisible. You can hide it. Nobody can count your yams. But wheat stands in a field. Anyone can estimate the harvest. And tax it. The state is essentially a grain tax collection operation. Everything else exists to make that possible. Every passport, every anthem, every border war, traces back partly to the fact that wheat is easy to count. But before you can tax grain, you need walls. And the oldest known walls belong to Jericho. Around 8,000 BCE. Building it required an estimated 11,000 person-days of organized labor. Somebody planned it. Somebody directed it. Somebody fed the workers. That is not a family project. That is administration. And administration is the skeleton of a country. Once you have surplus grain and walls, you get inequality. Whoever controlled the granary controlled the food supply, and whoever controlled food had power. For tens of thousands of years, ancient bands used mockery and gossip to stop anyone getting too powerful. Ambitious individuals found a way around this, by claiming a special relationship with the gods. Once temporary prestige became hereditary rank, you were one step from a king. And a kingdom is a country with a crown. Around 3,500 BCE, a settlement called Uruk began growing into something the world had never seen. By 3,100 BCE, it housed 40,000 people. The world's first true city. A city of 40,000 has a problem a village of 150 does not. You cannot govern by gossip. So they invented writing. Writing was not invented for poetry or prayer or philosophy. It was invented for accounting. Over 85% of the earliest known written documents are administrative records. The first written word was probably not God or love or war. It was probably a number next to a bag of barley. The country was built on paperwork. Around 2500 BCE, two Sumerian city-states fought over a strip of fertile land. A king surveyed the border and erected a stone marker to define it officially. When the border was violated, war followed, and divine curses against anyone who crossed it again. Two countries, arguing over where one ends and the other begins. Sound familiar? But a border between city-states is not yet a country. A country requires something more. It requires the idea that everyone inside that line belongs together, even strangers who have never met. Robert Carneiro proposed his theory of environmental circumscription. Fertile land surrounded by barriers, desert, mountains, ocean, forces growing populations to compete. When war breaks out, losers cannot leave. There is nowhere to go. Village absorbs village. Chiefdom absorbs chiefdom. Eventually, you get a state. Countries were partly invented because people were trapped together and had to figure out how to live at scale. And the violence that comes before a border becomes official is older than most people realize. At Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, 13,000 years ago, 59 skeletons showed signs of violent death. At Naderich in Kenya, 10,000 years old, 27 individuals massacred along a resource-rich lakeshore. People were killing for territory thousands of years before anyone drew a line on a map. The border came later. The violence came first. In Egypt, around 3100 BCE, the Narmer palette shows one ruler unifying two lands. One ruler, two lands, combined into a single political entity, by force. But not every civilization built its country the same way. The Indus Valley Civilization, 2600 to 1900 BCE, covered more area than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. Their cities were built on precise grids. Their bricks were standardized across 1,000 kilometers. And yet, almost no evidence of palaces, no royal tombs, no images of armies, possibly governed by merchant guilds and ritual elites, not by conquerors. A country built on shared weights and measures, not on conquest. But even these great civilizations were not countries in the way we understand the word today. A modern country requires that ordinary people feel they belong to the same community. The date most historians point to as the birth of the modern nation-state, October 24, 1648. The Peace of Westphalia ended two wars and established that each state controls its own internal affairs. The system of countries that divides the earth today runs on rules written 378 years ago. But Westphalia gave the legal framework. The emotional framework came later. Benedict Anderson argued in 1983, a nation is an imagined community. You will never meet 99.99% of your fellow citizens, yet you feel you share the same story. That feeling is not natural. It was manufactured. And Anderson argued the machine was the printing press. When millions read the same words in the same language at the same time, they felt like one community. Ernest Gellner said it bluntly. Nationalism does not awaken dormant nations. It invents them. When Italy unified in 1861, only 2.5% of the population spoke standard Italian. We have made Italy. Now we must make Italians. The country came first. The people who supposedly defined it came after. In 1793, the French Revolution introduced something entirely new. Citizens owed military service to a nation. The country was no longer just something you lived in. It was something you could be asked to die for. And sometimes, the borders came from people who had never set foot in the country at all. In 1916, Sykes and Picot drew lines dividing the Arab world in an afternoon. Those lines had almost nothing to do with the people who actually lived there. In 1884, European nations divided Africa among themselves. No African rulers were invited. The world is still inventing countries. South Sudan became independent in 2011. So how did humans invent countries? They did it in layers. First, they settled down, tying identity to land, marking it with the bones of their ancestors. Then, they grew grain, creating surplus that could be stored, controlled, taxed. Then they built walls, grew into cities, invented writing and bureaucracy. Then they fought wars that absorbed smaller groups into larger ones. Then they invented sovereignty and nationalism and drew lines on maps. Ernest said, "A nation's existence is a daily plebiscite. It exists because people inside it choose, every day, to act as if it exists. Tonight you will go home to a country. You probably will not think about it. But that country is younger than pottery, younger than agriculture, younger than the dog on your couch. For 98% of human history, it did not exist. A country is a story that enough people believed for long enough. If this changed how you see the lines on a map, that is exactly what this channel is here for."